Is it available to you folks?
Yeah, it's visible.
Cool. So I have a very smaller slide. I don't want you to bore with the slides enough. I'll show you actually in the code itself how to code or how to get started with Android or Kotlin, whatever. But before that, I'll give you a brief about me. I work at Clue in Berlin, Germany as an Android engineer, and I am a Google developer expert for Android and Kotlin. This could have been possible because of Singh itself. At least I have to accept that fact. Now, the whole point of this was to make you understand about backend as well for Android. But now I think it would be only good for Android itself. So I'll give you an intro of Kotlin and Android, Kotlin basics, Android hands-on, and a couple of resources to start off with. And at last, I'll give you a couple of tips why you should be an Android developer, which worked fine for me. And so I'll introduce you to all the aspects of Kotlin. So just let me know how many of you have a basic knowledge of Kotlin, at least in the chats, so that I know what to cover and what not to cover. So Kotlin, as a brief history, is a very like new programming language in the market based on top of JVM, on which Java is also built. It was built by a company called JetBrains and blah 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 blah. But we don't need to care about that. So uh, these are the resources which I'll share, but not now, later. I'll actually go to Android Studio and I'll start everything on the code. So I don't want to bore you with slides again. So this is what I want to show you. And if you have any questions, please let me know because I technically would not be able to see all the questions right now, but whenever I do, I'll just check it out. So I was told by Abhishek that you guys know how to create a project in Android Studio, but I'll just again give you a very basic brief how to do it, right? So, uh, whenever you start making a project, whenever you create a new project, you get a couple of slides or screens to build it from, right? No activity is nothing as a blank screen, or basically an activity is something which you see on your phone, right? Whenever you use a WhatsApp, Facebook, name whatever application, whatever you see is an activity. This is a basic activity which has nothing. This is a plus icon how you see on WhatsApp, right? When you create a chat. This is a bottom screen one which Instagram has it. Empty compose, let's not talk about it. This is a new UI designing toolkit, but let's not talk about it. We cannot relate it. Full screen is something when you start watching a video on Instagram. This is more of an ad. Whenever we watch or use a free app, we sometimes get an ad. This that ad design. This is the Google Maps login and whatever different designs. But generally, like 99% of the times, or in my case, I would say 100% of the times, I have always created an empty activity which is by default selected. I select this empty activity which has nothing. I'll go next. Now, here, there are three things which you always need to take care of. First is your name, whatever you name it. I'll name it as Sinagar because it has been some age I've never spelled it. So you can see the spelling. Then there is this package name. Package name is always unique. So even if you compare two different applications in your Play Store, you would never see uh, same package name for two different applications. It has to be unique. It's more like a domain name for the web, right? So a general recommendation to create a package is always reverse order of your domain. So I'll use com.himanshu. This is my website and whatever app or design you want to put it. So I'll give app, right? This is one. This is the saving location. You need to see which language you want to choose. The topic is Kotlin, right? So we'll use Kotlin and the minimum SDK. I want to support Lollipop and above, Android 5 and above. But generally nowadays it's always Marshmallow and above. It's almost the same, but we'll go with Lollipop for now. And I'll just press finish. That's how you basically do it. Just let this project build and then I'll explain the other setups for you. So, okay, till the point it builds, I'll explain you what Gradle is. So, Gradle is basically the whole package manager which is being used buy the project to build your app in short, right? So this is building my application. Just a second, I'll mute. So whenever we have this whole code and we want to build it, right, or as an app or APK, how we know it, this is the project which builds it. I don't know, it will take some time, and there's a very good joke around it that till the time Gradle builds, you can go and make your coffee, but just don't leave right now. So now, since I can have some time to ask, how is it being in Siagar right now for you folks? How is it? And please feel free to text whatever you want, not just the questions. It's always nice to interact. Okay, I think the project is built. So yeah, this is the activity which I was talking about. This is, hold on, I'll stop this. Yeah, and this is the screen we have, which if I want to test it out, this is how it will be printed. I'll just show you by running it. But yes, this is the activity. Whenever you run the app, this is how it looks like. Now, to give you a very basic brief about this whole project, I'll close this and this. We have this manifest file here. If you consider a manifest, it's like an index of your book. It has all the activities listed here. So for now, we have main activity. So it is one of them is listed here. Second, it's pretty much the other names, labels, and whatever you want to. Whenever you run this app, main activity will open. And that is the reason it is a launcher activity. If you can see this here, launcher basically means the new one. Now, when we come down to this is the activity, the screen which you will see. If you want to create more activities, you just go here, new, and create activity fragment, whatever you want to, right? Then we have this resource. RES means resource. What resource does is drawable is basically a file where we store our images, logos, and whatever we want to show in the app. Layout is basically how your activities have this. So just check this outline, r.layout dot activity underscore main. This is here, which resides under the layout. Map is the file where we have the icon of our app. So whenever you see a WhatsApp icon on the phone, this is where it is stored. And then we have values. Values has this colors and the strings and the theme how you want to use the app. So we always have two themes. This is how it looks like in the day theme or the light theme, or this is how it looks like in the darker theme or the night theme, however you want to call it. Now, I'll go and run through a couple of things and just let me know whatever if you have questions, but I'll run through a couple of things, how we do stuff in Kotlin. So this is the basic thing, how it gets created in, I'm sorry. This is the basic thing, how it gets created in an activity of a Kotlin file, but this is how you define a class. So I'll not describe you what a class is. I expect you to know, but I'll just give you a run through again. This is how you create a function, and this is how you set a content. So I'll go in a very basic and a very brief way, just so that you have a touch base upon how Kotlin works. So we declare variables in Kotlin. So to declare a variable, we use val, the variable name. So I'll just name it as variable name, and I'll assign a value 0. There is another way to declare a variable, and that is var. So these two things will actually work fine, right? Val and var are both ways to declare a variable. But when you use a val, you have to use, you cannot change the value of it. So for example, if I use this variable name and I assign a new value 1, it would throw an error to me. The error would be, it cannot be reassigned. So whenever you see a val, This basically means this is a constant value and it cannot be changed. This is assigned once. But in var, if you want to change it, you can change it to whatever you want. That's not an issue because var basically means mutable. So the difference between val and var is immutable and this is mutable, right? So mutable means you can change it later, and val is immutable, which you cannot change it further, right? So that's how you can declare variables into it. So I think I explained you the variables. Yes. Now another way of explaining it to is there is also val. I'll just add comments here. So two of the ways I explained was var and val. There is another way which we can assign a variable is const val, and we'll name it as, let's say, variable const. And if I want to pass a zero here, whatever, sorry, not this one on a later stage, but yes, if I want to pass a variable here, this is of type integer, right? But here you can't see. If I just hide this part and I show you this, you would not recognize if it's an integer or not. So if that part you can add int, and it defines that this is type of integer. And now if you want to attach a string, let's say I pass it Himanshu, it will throw an error because it requires an integer and it found a string. But if I remove this as an explicit type, this would be gone because now it considers by default this variable const is of type string, right? But I need a variable here of integer type. So I'll pass 0, or let's say I'll pass 10, right? There are a couple of ways to do it. I'll just rename this as 1. And let's say I'll create another variable. I'll name it as variable 2 of type integer, and I'll name it as 20, right? Now, typically, how we do a sum in Kotlin is I'll do val sum is equals variable 1 plus variable 2. Right? That's how typically you do in Java or any other programming languages. But here, another way of doing it is you can use an extended properties of this variable. So you can just use plus operator here, and you can just pass it as this. Now what this will do is it will give you a sum of here, which would turn out to be 30. In the similar way, if you want to subtract something, right, you can use minus and variable something, right? Whatever you want to do it. That's basically your call. Same for division and stuff. That's how you do the sums and everything, right? Now, another way, or one of the important factors in programming languages is a function. So this is a function. Let's say the old traditional way of what we create a function is we create a hello world function. So let's say I'll create a function called say hello world, and I'll just return let's say hello world, right? Now if you see here, this throws an error because we are returning something but we are not passing the type of the return. So we can pass string, and now the error is gone. So what this function tells you is, this function tells you this function, to create a function we first use the fun keyword. We then named the function. I named it as say hello world. We have a colon here, and then we pass the type of the function we have, a string. Now, when you pass type of a string, you have to return a string as well. So let's say if I remove this, it will throw an error. It says that a return expression is required. So this is why we pass the return here, hello world, right? But if I pass out a string here, integer here, then this will throw an error. If I pass a float here, this will again throw an error, because this is what we expect. But if I, let's say, return 0, this will again throw an error. But if I want to convert it to a string, I'll just do to string, or as okay, I can convert a number to as a string, and this will work fine, because now this number will actually print in double quotes with a 0, because we have converted this number to a string. That is one way of doing it. Now let's go back to hello world again, this one. So this, if you remember from any programming language, C, Python, or whatever you have done till now, this is a typical way of creating a function where it says that this is a function and you have a return type to return something. But in Kotlin, you can also use a function as expression. What I mean by this is, now let's say I'll create another function, say hi. Traditionally, what you'll expect me to do is I'll create this return here and I'll say hi, right? Something like this, as a typical how we did for say hello world. But in Kotlin, I can convert this as an extension or an expression per se, and I'll delete this directly. And here, I'll just have this. So if you see this function, it is an expression function where I don't have an explicit type of what it returns, or I don't have this block, the curly braces block with a return statement. I can directly assign a value to it. Say hi. This is a power of Kotlin how you want to do it, right? This is also assigning a value hello world to this function, but here I'm not doing all of that stuff and I'm just directly equalizing it to say hi. I just added an equal sign and I just added say hi, right? That's pretty much how you do it. Now, how do you call a function? That's the bigger part. Now let's go to this function. I'll add another comment, call a function. And let's say if I want to call say hello world, I'll just call like this. Or if I want to call say hi, I can call the functions like this. And if I click this, you just see that this is the function being called, right? This is how you basically create functions into it. Now, there are two different things which I'll explain. First is conditional thing. And I'm so sorry if this looks like a briefer, but I have to give you a bit of overview in Kotlin as I was asked, so I'm just giving it to you. So in conditional things, we traditionally have if else, right? If and else, which Kotlin has for sure. This is pretty much you might be familiar with because we have been doing this since ages, and I don't know since when, but we are doing it. Now, there's another thing in Kotlin called when. This is pretty much similar to if condition, but here when, let's say I have this variable one, I'll pass on variable one, and now I'll check the conditions to it. If variable one is 10, right? Basically, it means if the variable is 10, let's say I'll print something is 10. But if it's not 10, let's say it's 20, I'll print is 20. Or if both of the conditions are not matched, I'll use else block. I'll print not matched or something, whatever you want to do it. Now, this is a when expression, which we basically call in place of if in condition. So the equivalent of this when condition if block is if variable one is equals to 10, else if variable one is equals to 20, or we have the else block. These two things are basically equal how you want to do it, right? But this is the traditional programming way to do, and this is the Kotlin way of doing it. This is how you do a conditional check here. Now, one of the other things which I wanted to talk to you about was variables and objects. Oh, sorry, classes and objects. Again, this is a very common topic. I'll just try to make it short. Let's see if I can. So let's say I create a class. I'll name it as name, and I'll have two properties of it, right? Let's say first name of string, and I'll have another name, second name of type string, right? And I'll pass it as, let's say I'll pass it on my name, and here I'll pass Himanshu. So this is a class which looks like this, right? And if I want to create an object of it, I'll explain you what it is. I'll just pass name is equals name, right? And this has been created, right? Again, this is a typical way of doing it. If you remember from Java, you will have another name function like this, and you'll have something. That's called the basic way of creating a constructor, right? But what I'll do is I'll move this in the constructor of this. So if you see here, move to constructor and this as well, move to constructor. Now, this is a typical class how we construct in Kotlin, where whenever you create a class like this, right, you have this braces and you add the variables there. That is basically the constructor parameters of a class. And now if you want to access it, you can just use first name or something, whatever you want to do, right? Let's say full name. Here you can access the first name plus the second name. Now this will be accessed from the constructor parameters. But if you see, we are not passing any values to it because the default value is Himanshu and for the second name it's Singh. So if I delete this, now here there would be an error. It requires first name and second name. So I'll add this. Here as well I'll add Himanshu and here I'll add Singh. This is both the same how I was doing it here or I was passing it here, right? That was basically a default value so that if I don't pass anything here, still the values got to be Himanshu and Singh. Now in similar way, I can create name one and here I can pass something else, right? Some other value, some random string. Similarly, I can do for multiple different variables. So what does that do? What is a class for us, right? Can anybody explain or think about the easiest definition of class? What is a class? A class is basically, if anybody has seen a construction of a house, right? A class is basically the design and implementation of someone's thought, that an architect comes to your place and says, okay, I think this place should be like this, and this is how I visualize it. This is my design of it. And when you see the design on a blueprint, that is what you consider a class in programming language. This is basically my visualization of how I wanted this name class to be. Now, this is an object of that class, name, right? When we define it, what is an object in our layman terms? It is basically the implementation of that blueprint, correct? So when I say I can have different objects of the same class, name, and number of times, right? In that, as an example would be, if you have a building, consider a building in a society. Whole flat, each and every flat is the same. So basically there would be one class or the blueprint of the design or of the building flat, and that had been implemented 10 times, for example. So basically 10 objects of it. So that's how you can define the classes or something like that. That's pretty much how you much should know in creating an Android application, right? REST interface, sealed classes, and n number of things you can learn while doing it. So this is a brief of how you much should know, right? Now, let's talk about, let's say, Kotlin or Android a bit more, right? So this is my design file. This looks like hello world, for example, right? And I don't know, but we somehow love this hello world things here. So I'll actually go here and I'll delete this. I don't want this text view here. Let's design our something own. So for example, I'll go to design. Let's say I want a button here. So I have a button. If you can see this one, right? Now I want this button. So if you can see in the code base, you see I am using a constraint layout. So to explain a constraint layout, again in a layman term, this button has to be constrained to some certain relative positions, right? Let's say I want this button to be constrained here and here so that it aligns itself from both the parents. These four sides are considered as parent, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Left, right, start, right, end, top, and bottom. And I also want it to be full screen, like the full width. So generally, in initial days, or now or as well, you can use linear layouts and do that stuff again and again. But that degrades the performance. So if anybody tells you that you have to use linear layouts or relative layouts, don't use it because someone has said. Because the problem with that is whenever you create a good application in Android, right, it actually makes no sense to use it because it degrades the performance as the app grows bigger. So I will constrain this to these three sites. For example, this one, this two, and this three, right? So to drag it's very normal. Just click this circle here and drag it to this. You see this arrow, right? This arrow is basically the constraint of the button, and you drag it here. Now this has been dragged here, and if you see, the points which are not constrained are basically an outlined circle, but the one which is constrained has a filled blue, right? It's a white blue, it's a filled blue. Now I'll constrain it to the start. There you go. Now you see there are two constraints, the zigzag lines, right? One and the two. These are the zigzag lines which are there. And now as a third point, what I wanted to show you is I want to constrain it to the bottom here. But just check this code once. You would see there is an error being thrown, button with an underscore red. It always says it's an error. Whenever you see an underscore or underline of a red, it's an error. But it's an error because we always want to constrain this button on minimum of three sides. So whatever view it may be, text view, button, whatever image, right? It has to be at least constrained to the three sides. So I'll take this and I'll constrain it to the bottom. And now you would see the error is gone because the error is always there for if it's not constrained on three ends. That is one of the thumb rules you have to remember while designing an Android app. Now, this is a very small peculiar button. But what I want is I want to make it full screen. So you see this is a wrap content, right, as a width. The width I want to be the match parent. Like it should match the parent sites, 1 and 2. So now there are two things to understand. One is wrap content. Wrap content basically means that how much content this whole UI has, it will expand itself till that point. It's basically like an elastic. You stretch it how much you want, right? So I just have button as a text, it will expand till then. But if I want it to be match parent, in constraint layouts, I can use match parent like this, or I have to use 0dp. So now this both looks the same, like the match parent and 0dp. But the point being here is, now here it in 0dp it matches the constraint parent. So the constraint is this too, it matches the size of that. But in match parent, no matter what the constraint are, it is matching the parent by default. If we have any other UI element, it would not match itself. And I'm sorry if I may be a bit too fast. So this is how you constrained it one by one, and this is what we have done. Now here, let's go to the code here once. We have an ID or is an identifier. It is to identify in this layout activity underscore main to identify if this button is associated or is very unique. So IDs cannot be replicated. Two different elements cannot have same UI. ID, sorry. So let's say if I have one more button, you would see the ID being throwing an error because duplicate ID there. So I'll name it as button 1. And now the error is gone because now we don't have two same IDs in the same place. Now let's say if I drag this here, you would see this button coming in exact center. The reason being is we have constrained it to the 4 sides, right? It requires minimum 3, but I have given 4. So it is constrained on the left, start, end, bottom, and the top of the parent, correct? So that basically means it will be on the center. So now let me remove the bottom one. And now we have two different buttons on the bottom and on the top. This is basically a button, how you can design elements. Let's say if I want to pass an image view, right? This is what helps us to store images in our UI. Now, I'll give it as an ID. I'll pass it as image view. And this is the image view we have. Now let me constrain it to some place here. I'll constrain it to this point. Just to see that it works. and you can see the image being constrained in the bottom, right, in the center, sorry. It is center of the screen, but it is also in the center of the button. So if you see the constraint here, in the first bottom one, let's see, it is being constrained to the parent. This is also to the parent, and this is also to the parent. Basically, the edges of the screen or the phone you have. Bottom of this is the bottom to top of. Then the end is still on the parent. The start is still on the parent, but the top the top of this image view here is constrained to the bottom of this button. That is what is written, top to bottom of. So this is what you can actually understand from the constraints, that this can be constrained from any and every function or any UI component you have. So button 1 and button were the two components I had. So I constrained this image view on that. And let's say if I have to set some image to it, I'll just add source, and I don't have an image right now, so I'll just use some default images. Let's see if I have any. Yeah, so I can see this default image. I got some from Android. I'm using this to set it here, or maybe I'll just set the icon here, this icon. So I've set an image as well here. So to set an image, you use the source src and you set an image. Now, this might be too much for you. I promise when you go back and you start exploring on yourself, there might be stuff you might understand without even thinking of it, because you're seeing how it's done, right? Now, the second part. This is how you basically design your UI. If you want to play something else as well, you can do it here, whatever you want to. Now it's your call. Now, let's go back to this activity. And let me split my activities so that you can see what is being there. So this is my UI. And now I want to make a click listener, or like I want to click this button 1. So if you know or use any application on your phone, what do? You actually click this button, you get some data out of it, right? So there are two ways to make a button click. So the first way, let's discuss this. I'll make this button clickable. So I'll use on click. Here I can use set button click. This is not the recommended way. Never do it. The another one, another way to make a button clickable. So I'll use this is not the recommended way, but I'm still showing you this, right? And you click. So click listener what I want to. Now on the left, you would see that this error is gone, because now we have the same function. And whatever you write here would be button click. This is one way of creating a click listener, not the recommended way. Never do it. The another way to do it, let's say we want to make a button click listener, and this is the recommended way. You use, let's say, find view by ID, but technically you would not also use this, because now we have something called view bindings, but this is out of the scope. You'll learn in the next one maybe. So I am using find view by ID, which basically means I am finding a view based on its ID. So now you remember why we need a unique ID for each view. This has button 1, this has image view. So I'll use r dot, let's say ID. I want button 1, right? Now I have this button accessible here. I can assign this to a variable, let's say button 1. And now I want to perform a click to it. So if I want to perform a click, I'll use button 1 dot set on click listener. Now here whatever I write will be the same, right? This is for my buttons. So there are two ways to access the clicks. Either you write one on click here, or you use this ID to just invoke that variable and use that variable to add the click listeners. That's how you basically do it. But the cleanest way I would recommend always to start off with Android is never ever write anything on this function. Never. Make it clean. But since let's say we have this function, we'll add one more function and whatever, this function will grow big, right? So always create a function like this. I always name it as init view. So I can move this function here, right? Now if you see, this on create is smaller, it's a bit clean, And now initialize view or init view, whatever you want to call, you can pass all the things here. You can have couple of different functions. Let's say this is for button one, right? So I can name it as init button one. If I want, I can just pass another different functions like this n number of times, and each function will contain its own set of implementation of whatever they want. It can be for button one. If I want to remove this, let's say let's remove this, right? And let's set up the button first. Here, again, I'll create a variable. I'll use find view by ID. I'll use button and I'll pass the ID of it. Now in this button, I'll use set on click listener and I'll do this. So now you can see I have two different functions doing two different set of tasks. One of them is creating a set click listener for this button. One of them is creating for this function. That's how you can segregate your views, right? That's one of the ways to do it. I think that's pretty much how I wanted to cover in your initial starts. Just go back, whatever you have, and whenever you start doing view bindings, I'm not sure if that's your scope in your study jams. I'm pretty sure it is. But whenever you start doing it, you don't need to do this or you don't need to do this. You can just use this as button and you have to do something like view binding dot button. And this view binding variable will access this view for you. That's how basically you do in view bindings and you can start doing it. One last thing if I want to do is, if I want to share this init button, if I want to do something with images, right? So I'll do init images and I'll create a function to it. Here, what I'll do is I'll create this for image view. I'll just do it one last time. Find view by ID. This will be image view and the ID would be image view as well. Whatever we set it here, right? We set image view. And if I want to set an image dynamically, we can use like this, set image bitmap, drawable, icon, label, resources, whatever you want. This is how you do it. And this is basically if you want to do a play with image views. And always remember as a thumb of rule that whenever you do something or with some view or something, always make sure that you never write everything here. Just create functions and have its implementation separated in this. Now, this is all about views and how you can access it. Now, a couple of things I'll make sure you know as one of the functions. Whenever you run this app, this is the function which runs the first time. And the name itself is very clear, on create. Whenever this function gets created, the on create gets called. So since we were writing everything here, this is the best place to write because in this place is the first time whenever this activity is called or it's launched, this place will be called for sure. Then we have something called end resume, right? We have something called on start. We have something called on pause. Then we have on destroy, I think. On create, on start, on resume, on pause, on destroy. I think these are the ones. Ooh. I'm sorry if I might be missing something, but this is the typical basic level when you start off with, right? Just let me check if I am missing something. Oh, but let me just check. I don't think I'm missing anything. Cool. So yeah, this is the first which gets called. Then this is the second. Like whenever the on create has started, this is the part. On start is the part when you start seeing the views. It would happen in so fast of a fraction of seconds that you would not realize. But this is where you see the views. On resume is where you can start interacting, right? So when you think that you can click this button, you can click this, or you can do something. This is the on resume part where you can start doing it. Now, on pause is the part when it goes in the hidden mode. When I say hidden, it's like whenever you start your phone and you just drag your phone from bottom in the Pixel 6 or wherever, all these phones you see is visible but not interactable, right? Visible but not interactable is when this is called on pause, and on destroy is called when this activity is destroyed. So let's say whenever your app, you just go up and swipe out and remove it from the recent usage apps, right? This is on destroy is what is called. So when you sit for the interviews, on this is one of the questions anybody will ask. What is the activity life cycle you have? This is for the beginners, but this is one thing you should know. On create is when the first time activity is launched. On start when you start seeing the screen. On resume when you can start interacting. And this is where it all stops. Then when you just make it partially visible, or when you have this multi-window screens, on pause is called, and when you destroy it, this is called. So yeah, that's pretty much how you work with activities, and I would highly recommend go and play with the app, or highly go and play with different set of designs you want to do. Maybe just go and pick up any app which you like, maybe WhatsApp or something. Just try to replicate that. That's pretty much for my end. I'll answer the questions for sure, but let me just give you a couple of more things so that you can go back and start learning. In the resources part, I would highly recommend check Kotlin Lang. This is the website. This is a Mindocs website. I'm not sure how many of you know, but this was quite a big one. And I used to write a lot of articles on this. So if you have any questions regarding Android anywhere and anything, this is the place you should go. And officially the Android ecosystem. That's pretty much what you should be looking for. But Mindocs should be good enough for you to get started, to get a job, and whatever you want to desire out of this Android ecosystem. That's pretty much it. I'll stop sharing and I'll take questions if any. I'm sorry if anybody would, it's fast, but this is how I had to cover up in an hour.
I think some questions are there on chat. Let's
Yeah.
bring them up.
Huh. So yeah, I'll just read it out and I'll answer it.
Yeah, sure.
Omkar has a question, mandatory, but generally how Android is evolving right now, we never use multiple activities anymore. We always have one activity and we have multiple composables or whatever you want to name it, right? Fragments as well. So at that point, we only have one activity and now always we keep it main, but it's totally a preference of yours. But a recommended way is definitely main activity. Ranjit, can we use both Java and Kotlin? So it was my choice of selecting Kotlin. You can choose Java as well, but also in the later stages, whenever you create an activity, you can just create a file of Java and you can start working with Java. But nowadays, nobody works on Java, at least for the new apps or the new screens they build. Everything is recommended Kotlin. Ashutosh has a question, benefits of using Kotlin over Java. A lot of benefits. Firstly, there's a very good saying that uh, null pointer exceptions. The guy who built it itself mentioned that how do I call it? Like it was $1 billion mistake for him. He mentioned that on his quote. So whenever null pointer exception came, that is one of the reasons Kotlin came over it, that it had the option of not having null pointers, and you know by default that if it can have a null option or not, right? That's a benefit of it. Plus, it's quite expressive. You can choose whatever you want to. There are a lot of Lambda functions, a lot of different other stuff to learn from, and that's how you should do it. So Kotlin over things, yes, and I would always recommend Kotlin if you're looking out of for a job in Kotlin in Android. Omkar has another question. How much time would it take to learn and switch to Kotlin from Java? It would not take long. It's pretty much the same. You just need how you can create a function in Java or a function in Kotlin. It's just a preference how you want to do it. For me, it was 2 or 3 days, but yes, it's not much more than that. Ranjit, is it okay to use constant layout every time, even for basic layouts? I would say yes. Keep it as a habit of making and using constraint layouts. But if it's just a basic 2 things or 3 things, just use linear layout or relative layouts. Just make sure the layouts are not nested. Like what I mean by nested is there should no relative layout or a constraint layout inside a linear layout or constraint layout. It should all be a single tree. Omkar has a question. Considering all pros and cons, what do you suggest Java or Kotlin? Kotlin any day. Java, I don't think anybody uses apart from backend, and now backend also moves to Kotlin. Yes, Sudeep. Thank you so much. On stop is the another one which I literally forgot. I, on pause, on stop, and on destroy. Yes, they are the six ones. So basically, the reverse. On create, reverse is on destroy. On start is on stop. On resume, on pause. Yes, on stop is the one I forgot. Ranjit has a question. Learn Jetpack Compose over XML. I can't officially say, but okay, Jetpack Compose is not fully stable right now. I would never say. So you still need to use XML, and let's say down the line of 2 years, if you take up a job in Android, nobody would be using Compose fully, right? They still be XML, so you need to know XML first, and then you should go for Compose. But understand the XML. Rohit has a question. It is good to go with Android or with Kotlin or Flutter. That's like a personal preference, but always remember this. When I always say that consider before Flutter there was React Native, before React Native there was Cordova, before that there was something else, and there were a huge number of things. One thing which always remained constant was the native Android with Java and now with Kotlin. So frameworks and any other thing would come and go, but native has still be there. You never know. 2 years down the line, Kotlin multi-platform takes over Flutter, and then you say that should I learn Kotlin multi-platform or should I not learn it? So my point being is always know the native and the quirks of it, and then decide if you want to do anything else. I think I answered the question. Yes.
Okay. So, so thank you, Himanshu, for joining us. It was good to hear you, and hope all our attendees would has got to learn much from this and will be able to start their journey in Kotlin and Android. So hope to see you in the upcoming sessions. And Himanshu,
Thank.
we would like to see you in more sessions under Kiagar. And yeah,